most cricket matches, it's the batsmen who usually cream off most of the credit. The crowds come to see the stars hitting their sixes, reaching their 50s, reaching their hundreds, and generally damping down the aspirations of the bowlers.
But there have been many heroes amongst the ranks of the bowlers. Some have been admired for their unflagging persistence under a hot sun on seemingly endless days. Others have been feared for their hostility or for their cunning with the wiles of flight and spin. Some specialize in blatant intimidation, some aim to trap the batsman by subtle deception. And others, notably in this era of limited overs cricket, earn a reputation for meanness, bowling with such accuracy that the greatest batsmen apart, only extreme risk-taking can bring runs. Now, our programme on batsmen proclaimed that bowlers are the huntsmen of cricket. Many of the famous bowlers you're now about to see will be merely names to you. But at the end of it all, you may perhaps be able to decide who was the greatest of them all and who least you would have liked to face. Skills and tactical thinking have been developing for over 200 years. Shrewd and pacey underhand bowling on the rough pitches of the day established their awesome reputations. Hampshireman David Harris and Lumpy Stevens, a former smuggler, were the most renowned bowlers of cricket's earliest recorded history, while James Cobbett was one of the first notable spin bowlers, making it buzz like a top. The great bowlers of the mid-19th century included John Wisden, the tiny fast bowler who bowled all 10 wickets over at Lord's in 1850, mighty Alfred Minn, the 18-stone Lion of Kent, William Clark, crafty old bowler who founded the Trent Bridge ground and the money-making All-England Wandering 11, William Lillywhite, the nonpareil who pioneered round-arm bowling, George Terham Tarrant, all over the place like a flash of lightning, according to W.G. Grace, and John Foghorn Jackson, the destructive Nottinghamshire pace bowler who was to die in abject poverty. But as the greatest batsman of all time, Sir Donald Bradman, has observed, cricket came of age only when overarm bowling was introduced in 1864. It was a natural sequence to round-arm bowling, which had been made legal in 1835 after John Willis of Kent had dared to bowl it, only to be banished for his boldness. By 1862, Edgar Wilshire, a Kentish left-armer and probably the best bowler in England at that time, had been humiliatingly no-balled at the Oval for raising his arm above shoulder level. He and 8 fellow professionals walked off the field, but next day the umpire was replaced, and in 1864 MCC recognised the inevitable in evolution by altering Law 10 to permit the overarm bowling that's been in general use to this day. Slow bowling was already an ancient craft when Wilfred Rhodes of Yorkshire came on the scene in 1898. And the craft was that much older when 28 years later he was called back by England at the age of 48 to help win the Ashes from Australia at the Oval in 1926. It's appropriate that we should start with the greatest wicket-taker of all. In his 33 years of first-class cricket, Rhodes schemed his way to 4,187 wickets, a figure unrivalled, and dare we say it, unlikely ever to be beaten. He bowled cleverly against the greatest, from W.G. Grace to Don Bradman. Indomitable even when being punished by a Jessup or a McCartney, he always knew what he was doing, and he usually won the day.
I didn't used to bowl with a long on at one time, but I put a man there to stop that shot of W.G.'s.
Of Shrewsbury?
I remember bowling him out with one that went through my arm, and he never played the ball. It hit his off stump. I said it was a fluke. He says, no, it wasn't. There's no fluke, he said.
Of Trumper?
I wanted to get it, Victor Trumper. I was the only one who could keep him quiet.
There were some good and very successful slow left-armers in those days. Bobby Peel of Yorkshire and England, Johnny Briggs of Lancashire and Charlie Blythe of Kent, both of them test players and incidentally both epileptics, and the young Frank Woolley, a Kentish immortal. And there was a dominant Australian leg spinner in the giant Warwick Armstrong, who actually used this form of attack in a negative fashion, bowling to frustrated Englishmen down the leg side. For years, the Australian team was built around George Giffen, a slow medium bowler who did the double, including 103 wickets in 31 tests against England. Perhaps the best spin bowler in the world at the turn of the century was the tall Hugh Trumbull from Melbourne on the left. He set a long-standing record of 141 wickets against England in 31 tests, and he held 45 catches, mostly at slip, for his fellow bowlers. But the bowling sensation of the age unquestionably was B.J.T. Bosanquet's development and exploitation of the googly, the wrist-spun ball that goes the other way. Many Edwardians thought it wasn't quite cricket, but what is the chief aim of spin bowling if not to deceive? Here we had the apparently traditional leg break spinning like an off-break, and all because of a twist of the wrist. Bosey laughed at himself when the ball slipped and bounced 3 or 4 times, but he fooled many distinguished batsmen. Others followed his lead. Australia's first great googly bowler was H.V. Horden. He took 32 wickets in the Test series against England in 1911-12. The South Africans seized on the new weapon enthusiastically, tormenting the best of England's batsmen in successive series before the Great War. Reggie Swartz, a friend of Bosanquet's, bowled only the top spinner and googly, no leg break, but how the wrong un turned. Ernie Vogler could bowl almost anything, but his googly, when the ball had lost its shine, was as lethal as a cobra. England's captain in 1907, R.E. Foster, thought him the best bowler in the world. And Aubrey Faulkner, a great all-rounder in the full sense of the word, spun the ball sharply both ways.
But the first real king of leg spin googly bowling was little Arthur Maley, the former glassblower from Sydney, who spun the ball prodigiously. Accuracy may not have been a strong point, but jovial persistence was, and with a keen brain and the bravery needed by all slow bowlers under fire, he diddled out the best batsmen Australia and England could send to the crease. He was the first to take 9 wickets in a Test innings, and in the 1921 tour of England he took all 10 Gloucestershire wickets for 66. In contrast, in a Sheffield Shield match at Melbourne 5 years later, his analysis in Victoria's innings of 1107 was 4 for 362. His figures could have been better, he said, if a chap in a tweed coat had held on to a couple of catches in the Shilling enclosure.
I had this ball painted half white, Jack, so that you might see it spinning better. Here's the leg break in slow motion. As the ball leaves the hand, a spin is given, which makes it break to the left.
Arthur Maley, a wicket taker who never deliberately bowled the maiden over.
In England, Charlie Parker for years was the most dangerous slow left-arm bowler around, but he was too difficult to handle in the eyes of the authorities and played only once for his country. Jack Farmer White was the epitome of modesty, calmness and accuracy, wheeling away with his slow left arm on county grounds and under a baking Australian sun. Bold, teasing, adventurous English wrist spin, Maley style, came from the diminutive Titch Freeman. Although he failed to make much impact on Australian batsmen, he returned some astounding performances in English cricket.
Well, Titch Freeman, of course, was a magnificent bowler in his day. I mean, 300 wickets in a season is fantastic. And, of course, I suppose he was partially responsible for me ever becoming a wicket kicker.
Les Ames, his Kent wicketkeeper, completed 69 catches and 52 stumpings for him in 1928.
Now, I used to dash down in the morning, open the paper, see how Kent had done, and see how many stumpings. It was stumped Ames, bowled Freeman, and so I always thought I wanted to be a Les Ames.
Titch trapped the staggering total of 2,089 victims in 8 consecutive English summers. 3 times he took all 10 wickets in an innings, 9 times he took between 15 and 17 wickets in a match.
Magnificent bowler, and I kept wicket to him too. It was after he retired on the Bearsted Green. He used to live at Bearsted, and a lovely little green there, and I actually kept wicket to the famous Titch. It was marvellous.
We're left to ponder the complex question of why Freeman's type was discouraged and eventually killed off in county cricket.
Australia's gnome-like Clary Grimmett brought new concepts of accuracy and economy to leg spin and its variations. See that cunning tread, that mean crouch, that low right arm. His Test debut, which brought him 11 English wickets at Sydney, didn't come until he was 33. And 11 years later, he became the first bowler to take 200 Test wickets, averaging 6 per match. In that time, he did as much for Australia with the ball as Bradman did with the bat. Grimmett went on developing variations long after he'd played his last Test. His flipper, the ball squeezed from the front of the hand, keeping low, was later much imitated. Another to be given a chance at international level when, well advanced in years, he was 46, was Queenslander Bert Ironmonger. Uncovered pitches in Australia became virtually unplayable after rain and hot sun, and dainty Ironmonger's spitting left-arm deliveries brought him 74 cheap wickets in only 14 Tests, including 11 for 24 as South Africa collapsed for 36 and 45 at Melbourne in 1932.
England's best right-arm leg spinners around 1930 included 3 from Middlesex: Ian Peebles, Walter Robbins and Jim Sims. Robbins was famous for the brisk googly which bowled Bradman in his first Test in England, and the urbane Peebles for dismissing the Don cheaply in the Old Trafford Test. The Australian master piled up 974 runs in the 1930 Test series, so his wicket naturally became, and remained for some years, the most prized in the world. Derbyshire's Tommy Mitchell was very successful at county level, and so was Glamorgan's off-spinner Johnny Clay. But lantern-jawed Tom Goddard of Gloucestershire was the most potent off-spinner and appealer of that time. On some days, when pitch and wind conditions were favourable, this giant with hands like meat dishes was quite irresistible. The English bowler of the 1930s, however, was Hedley Verity, the latest in the line of Yorkshire slow left-armers. He took 10 for 32 against Warwickshire in 1931, and a year later, also at Headingley, 10 for 10 against Notts, the best innings figures ever returned in a first-class match. The pitch wasn't regarded as sticky, but it was certainly congenial. Bowling at a pace close to that of Underwood in recent times, the tall, austere Yorkshireman paid less than 15 runs apiece for his 1,956 wickets. 144 of them came in Test matches, 14 in one memorable day at Lord's in 1934, when Australia were overwhelmed. This upright and intelligent cricketer was one of the most widely mourned casualties of the Second World War.
Australia in the 1930s depended almost entirely on spin bowling. Grimmett had taken over from Maley, and from the bush came the gangling, fire-breathing William Joseph O'Reilly, Tiger, the purveyor of leg breaks, top spinners and bouncing googlies at a pretty hot pace. Here was a rare concept, a spin bowler with the unbridled snarling approach of an out-and-out fast bowler. In only 19 Tests against England, O'Reilly reaped 102 wickets, and for his Sydney club St George, he sent back 766 batsmen at less than 9 apiece. A tough bushman schoolteacher of Irish descent, Tiger O'Reilly never gave up, even when England piled up 903 for 7 at the Oval.
When he actually delivered the ball, he bent his knees and he put all he had into his action. Every ball that O'Reilly bowled was a potential wicket taker. He didn't bowl what they call rest balls. Every time that ball left his hand, it was O'Reilly's intention to get somebody out. He was aggressive. He was known as the Tiger. But personally, I enjoyed batting against him. I like that type of bowler. He helped me to concentrate a great deal.
In that 1938 match at the Oval, Melbourne left-armer Chuck Fleetwood Smith came away with the grotesque figures of 1 for 298, which disguises the fact that on his best days he was unplayable, the batsman reduced to pushing out desperately in hope.
At one time, I was a right-arm bowler. An illness in my youth forced me to change my delivery, and this misfortune really came as a blessing in disguise.
He enjoyed fooling batsmen, and he smiled and whistled bird songs when they hit him to the boundary. He also once swung an entire Test series by bowling Hammond.
2 fine English leg spinners had their careers interrupted by the Second World War. Eric Hollis, who didn't spin it a lot but was as accurate as Grimmett, and Doug Wright, who once in a while bowled a ball to which there was scarcely an answer. Hollis took over 2,000 wickets in his long career, but he's remembered principally for one of them. Bradman bowled second ball for naught in his final Test innings. Doug Wright, who took a record 7 hat-tricks, was pure genius, though unavoidably erratic.
Well, Doug Wright, of course, was one of the most difficult to keep wicket to, because in his repertoire, besides his googly and leg spinner, he had the fast delivery, and which, when it came down, it was the fastest ball in England, and invariably when whistling down the leg side, so I had to be prepared to dive. And of course, because it was so quick, I had to give a signal to the slips, and that's the only time I ever had a signal to Doug Wright. He used to give me several signals in case the batsman twigged it, and I used to have to put my hands back behind my back, and then all the slips used to dash backwards in case they got hit on the shin or somewhere else, which was more painful. Oh, he was a tremendous bowler.
Wright could be hammered when length and direction failed him. But on his best days, even the champions could hardly get a touch on him. Look at this peach of a ball which bowled Hassett in 1951. After the war, each Test country presented its newfound spin talent. From South Africa came off-spinner Athol Rowan and left-armer Tufty Mann. India had Vinu Mankad, who would have been chosen in any World 11 in his time. Australia produced Fleetwood Smith's successor, George Tribe, who eventually earned a living running through Northamptonshire's county opposition, and Bruce Dooland, a masterful leg spinner who snared 770 wickets in only 5 seasons with Nottinghamshire in the 50s. Victorian off-spinner Ian Johnson gave the ball plenty of air from his distinctive action, while Colin McCool, a clever leg spinner, went on to find a niche with Somerset late in his career. In 1950, there emerged 2 young West Indians to sweep away over 100 wickets each on the Tour of England. Sonny Ramadin, a mystery spinner from Trinidad, spun out 26 Englishmen in the 4 Tests. Alf Valentine, the toothy Jamaican, 33 with sharply spun left-armers. In the Trent Bridge Test, Ramadin sent down 81 overs, Valentine 92, helping West Indies to another victory following their historic maiden success in England in the Lord's Test. Ram and Val remain curiosities when viewed against the later West Indian obsession with fast bowling.
And then came big Jake Iverson. The lumbering Victorian appeared from nowhere to bemuse and destroy the visiting England 11 in 1950-51, uniquely using his middle finger to spin the ball either way. It was all very confusing and slightly humiliating in that this unknown mystery bowler was 35 and no athlete. In the end, Hutton and Co. played Jack Iverson as an off-spinner, and he evaporated as promptly as he'd arrived, having taken 21 cheap wickets in the series, one of Test history's most absorbing cameos.
Cricket was now on the verge of the most extraordinary bowling performance of all. Jim Laker of Surrey had become a better bowler every year since his Test baptism in 1948.
Well, Jim Laker was probably the best spin bowler I've ever played against. I first struck him here at Headingley in 1948 when I was a whippersnapper of 19. And being a sort of a young brash batsman, I hit him for 3 fours and 3 balls to go from 100 to 112. Tried to do the same on the next ball and missed it, and my leg stump went over. So it sort of serves you right when you do stupid things like that.
Jim was a big spinner of the ball, and as Jim went on, he got better and better and better. And by the end of his career, he was probably bowling as well as he ever bowled in his life. And I think this is one of the things that happens with spinners.
Outwardly calm, Laker employed all the subtlety known to off-spinners and wrote his first incredible headline in 1950. He took 8 for 2 in a Test trial in his hometown of Bradford. Then 6 years later, he took all 10 Australian wickets in the Surrey match, but this was just the dress rehearsal. At Old Trafford in July 1956, he took 9 for 37 and 10 for 53 in the Test match. 19 wickets for 90 runs in all, and there are cricket lovers to this day who can scarcely believe it.
Well, the 1956 tour was a disaster tour as far as Australia were concerned. We won at Lord's on a good, quick wicket, and we came up to Old Trafford to play the third test match. And we had a look at the wicket, and we thought to ourselves, well, this will be a three-day match, and that's it. They had Laker and Locke in their side, and really, that's all they really needed.
Everybody talks about 1956, but I'm quite sure that on occasions I bowled just as well as did at Manchester, but didn't get that sort of reward.
The Australians swore they'd settled the score when they got him on their own hard pitches 2 years later, but they never really did.
Jim finished up with the world record figures of 19 wickets, but Tony Lockett was also a fine bowler. I think Tony, overall, on all conditions, was possibly just a fraction better in Australia than Jim.
Locke, Jim Laker's comrade in arms for county and country, was a ferociously competitive left-arm bowler whose arm action was modified several times as it failed to pass umpires' scrutiny. With Jim Laker, Locke helped Surrey to 7 consecutive county championships in the 1950s. He took brilliant catches off Laker at backward short leg when he wasn't scooping up wickets himself. He won test matches for England on damp or dusty pitches, and he developed his flighting skills in Australian cricket, a valuable and unforgettable cricketer. Locke's chief rival was Johnny Wardle of Yorkshire, sometimes a clown on the field, but a thoughtful, almost grim practitioner. Laker regarded Wardle's bowling in South Africa in 1956-7 as the finest exhibition of spin bowling he ever saw. On harder overseas wickets, Wardle bowled his unorthodox stuff out of the side and back of the hand, and like Fleetwood Smith, was often unreadable. Many, particularly in the north, thought Wardle should have been chosen for many more tests than he was.
In 1958, Richie Benaud was appointed as Australia's new captain, and he led a revival. A skilled and confident leg spinner, he had a long apprenticeship while the selectors kept their faith in him. It paid off dramatically. By the time of his retirement in 1964, Benaud had taken 248 wickets, an Australian Test record. He was probably more accurate than Maley and was seldom punished. And like all world-class spinners, he was never seen to lose his nerve. Dazzling fielding was sometimes his ally, and imaginative tactics often brought results, as at Old Trafford in 1961, when Australia seemed doomed. He bowled round the wicket, into the rough, and with 6 wickets for 70, spun his side to an amazing victory over England.
He kept the ball thereabouts, very, very accurate. He bowled a beautiful flipper, which he only developed late in his career, but it was a marvellous delivery. And unfortunately, it was his undoing, because in 1961, when he bowled at me at Worcester, he slipped this flipper in. It was an absolute beauty, but he hurt his shoulder when he did it. And I think that perhaps caused a premature end to his career, unfortunately. But a marvellous bowler, tremendous competitor as well. I mean, this was the great thing about Richie. He never gave anything away, and great man to play against.
Around this time, South Africa were fortunate in having one of the most determined off-spinners in history. Hugh Tayfield, of the superstitious kiss of the cap and tapping of the toe, gave the batsman no peace, probing with pinpoint accuracy, backed up by superb fielding. In England, in Australia, and at home, he proved to be the toughest of slow bowlers, exceeding the conventional fatigue barrier to turn 4 wicket hauls into 7, 8, and once at Johannesburg 9. Such was his stranglehold that a captain stated he was utterly convinced that no batsman could survive indefinitely while he was bowling.
India, who always had armies of spin bowlers from which to choose, had a leg spinner who also took 9 wickets in a test innings and was regarded by Gary Sobers as the best spinner he ever faced. This was Subhash Fergie Gupti, whose repertoire was bewildering. In contrast, Bapu Nagkarni's slow left arm was one of the meanest bowlers ever. At Madras in 63-4 against an England team reduced by sickness, he bowled 32 overs from which only 5 singles were taken. 3 years earlier, Nagkarni had conceded only 0.79 of a run per over against Pakistan at Delhi, the sort of performance that can give slow bowling a bad name. England hereabouts were strong in off-spin. Laker kept Roy Tattersall of Lancashire out of many test matches, although Tattersall averaged almost 4 wickets per test, with 7 for 52 against South Africa at Lord's in 1951, his best return. Fred Titmuss and Ray Illingworth gave England even greater depth during the 1960s. Coming into a period when the availability of the new ball was stretched out to 85 overs, which helped spinners generally, Titmuss and Illingworth took 275 test wickets between them. But the thick leg-side field placing of old was now forbidden. The crowded leg trap with more men out on the leg boundary was no longer to be seen. Titmuss, the little Londoner, flighted the ball beautifully. He was supported by excellent close fielding and the wicket-keeping of John Murray, who worked with him like an anaesthetist working with a surgeon. Ray Illingworth was very shrewd in a tight-lipped northern way. He shuffled in an almost sinister manner. It was said that as captain he knew best when and when not to bowl, but he was no shirker and his range of subtle variations demanded continuing respect from all batsmen. Had there been no Titmuss or Illingworth, David Allen of Gloucestershire, who still took 122 wickets for England, might have played many more than 39 tests. Intikhar Barlam emerged as the best spinner produced by Pakistan in their first 30 years of Test cricket. He was unusually accurate for a leg spinner with a lethal top spinner. At the age of 18, he took a wicket with his first ball in Tests, and later he became the first Pakistani to take 1,000 first-class wickets. For some years, however, the Test world record holder with 309 wickets was Lance Gibbs, the tireless, painfully thin West Indian off-spinner. On his retirement in '76, he'd sent down more balls, 27,115, than any other bowler in Test history. His action was distinctly brisk and his spinning finger often bled. He became a tight stock bowler, giving the fast bowlers time to recover their strength. Gibbs took a hat-trick at Adelaide during the memorable 1960-61 tour of Australia, and against India at Bridgetown a year later he took 8 for 38, his best figures. With his retirement, West Indies settled for an almost unvaried diet of pace bowling, to the game's great cost.
I can only think of one spinner who was a good bowler right from the word go, and that was Derek Underwood, who was a little bit of a freak, really.
Derek Underwood cut the ball with his strong fingers at a pace so far above that of the orthodox slow left armour that batsmen were mostly reduced to playing him from the crease. He took 100 wickets in his first season, 1,000 before his 26th birthday, and before pitches were shielded from the rain, he frequently took 7, 8 or 9 wickets in an innings. Even when pitches were covered, rain sometimes seeped under, as happened at Lord's in '74, and Underwood pounced 13 Pakistan wickets. Most famously, his 7 for 50 won a Test against Australia in '68, a few hours after a cloudburst had flooded the Oval. Alan Knott was his knowing angel behind the stumps in so many matches. Deadly Derek Underwood was truly a bowler without compare.
Among Australia's best spinners of the late 1960s was Johnny Gleeson, a so-called mystery bowler whose middle finger delivery was not dissimilar to Iverson's. He was not as tall, and he bent at the knees, but this somehow made him more difficult to read. Ashley Mallett, Australia's tall off-spinner, served his country well on and off from 1968 to 1980. We shall never know if he was as good as Trumbull, but it's just possible that Mallett was. And now for the phenomenon of India's pack of 4 world-beating spinners, Chandrasekhar, Venkataragaman, Bedi and Prasanna, who took 842 wickets between them in their combined 224 tests from 1961 to 1980. At one stage, India's all-time top 6 bowlers were all spinners. These four, while very different in technique, were nonetheless complementary to one another, and they gave India a spin bowling platoon such as was the envy of the world. Bishan Bedi was a purist bowler, slightly mystical, overwhelmingly friendly, a master of the aerodynamics of a spinning, floating cricket ball. He often applauded in genuine admiration when hit for six, but the shrewdest batsmen knew they stood on the narrow ledge of self-destruction and should avoid excesses. Prasanna and Venkat were both off-spinners. Pras, no more athletic than Bedi, was a game, teasing flighter of the ball, giving it a tantalising loop, loading it with spin, and causing it to wobble. Venkat was selected more consistently than Prasanna and bowled more in the English style, flatter, more tidily. All these Indian spinners were used to being called up into the attack early, after a few token overs with the new ball. Chandrasekhar, the fourth and most interesting of the famous four, came on early at the Oval in 1971 and spun India to their first Test victory in England. His fast leg breaks, top spinners and googlies in the Doug Wright mould were miraculously delivered by a whirling right arm that was partially withered, a legacy of childhood polio. Six years later, he spun out 12 Australians at Melbourne, mainly with vicious bounce on a dead track, to bring his country their first Test victory down under. All four combatants in India's golden age of spin relied on frenetically eager close catching and, it must be said, feverish appealing. It all left nightmares in opposing batsmen's minds. Their successors have been Dilip Doshi and the youthful Shivarama Krishnan and Maninder Singh. Despite their notable successes, it's been their misfortune to be measured constantly against the fabulous four.
And modern English spin? In the 1980s, this has been principally in the hands of John Emburey and Phil Edmonds of Middlesex. Here again is intriguing contrast. Emburey became a typical product of his age, first and foremost a run stopper. His accuracy has been utilised to deny and frustrate, to pin down and close up. He actually became a major asset in limited overs cricket, where economy is all, but he found wickets impossible to obtain in the 1987 Test matches. Meanwhile, Edmonds, more radiant but equally independent of mind, was a throwback to another age when slow bowlers experimented, tried the unusual, fell prey to boredom and strove to overcome it with something a little different. He followed the modern pattern of having close fielders huddled dauntingly near the batsman, though it must inhibit any bowler subconsciously. Who would willingly toss it high, ball after ball, when infielders are so dangerously close? Edmonds played for England on and off for 12 years, took his 100 Test wickets, then sauntered off to make his fortune in the city, which left one bowler as the main torchbearer for spin. Abdul Qadir, Pakistan's volatile leg spinner, entered his 10th year of Test cricket in 1987 with an unpromising run of lacklustre performances on England's slow and bounceless pitches. Then came the final Test at the Oval, where his team piled up a total of 708 before he was let loose on a firm surface which took spin and had some bounce in it. The result was 7 for 96 for Qadir, and 3 more wickets in the second innings, when he was tired and carrying an injury. 97 overs bowled, each bringing artistic relief to the widespread flow of faster bowling. Soon, in the home series in Pakistan, he began with 9 for 56, and he finished with an amazing 30 wickets in the 3 Tests against England. The bouncy little Muslim was to show that wrist spin could still be profitable as well as exquisitely entertaining. And to keep the torch burning, 19-year-old Narendra Hawani made a staggering Test debut at Madras early in '88. He took 16 West Indies wickets, 8 in each innings. But it does need healthy, responsive pitches. Cricket has always been richer entertainment with the leg spinner. Now, let's move on from that galaxy of slow bowlers to consider those of medium pace. Their ranks don't comprise as many world-class performers as those in the extreme categories, slow or fast, but they do include a man who was probably the greatest of them all. His name was Sydney Francis Barnes, and he came from Staffordshire. Ferocious of temperament, short on humour, he was endowed with a rare ability to bowl fairly fast and very accurately while spinning the ball either way. No one has matched his 49 wickets in 4 tests in South Africa in the last series before the Great War. And in only 27 tests, he took a phenomenal 189 wickets. He was the most feared bowler of his age, and he remains a strong candidate for the title of greatest ever. Accused once of not having the googly in his armoury, he disdainfully replied that he didn't need it. Even when he was 80, he could bowl a tidy length with a high arm, as this rare footage reveals. S.F. Barnes, destroyer of batsmen. Among the earliest medium pacers to make a mark were Alfred Shaw of Nottinghamshire, whose accuracy was pinpoint and laced with cunning, Tom Emmett, the happy-go-lucky Yorkshireman who mixed wides with lethal curving Yorkers, and George Lohman, the suave, athletic Surrey bowler who took 112 test wickets at less than 11 apiece in only 18 test matches. From Australia came Charlie Turner, a medium-pace off-cutter, who took his 101 test wickets in the 80s and 90s in only 17 matches, and left-arm bowler Jack Ferris, who joined the terror in many afternoons of destruction, bowling into each other's roughened footmarks. Also from Australia, though he wrote most of his history for Middlesex, came the rumbustious Albert Trott. He could bowl every ball known to man: bouncers, thunderous Yorkers, swervers, humiliating, tricky, slow ones. There were some splendid medium-pace bowlers around in the 1890s. Yorkshire's Schofield Haig, who clean bowled a high proportion of his victims. J.T. Hearn, the model professional from Middlesex, who earned over 3,000 wickets. And George Hurst, a brisk left-arm bowler from Yorkshire, an early swerver of the ball, comrade-at-arms of the immortal Rhodes. From Australia came Monty Noble, with skills adapted from baseball pitching. And from Philadelphia came J.B. King, who moved the ball about with incredible deception and the arrogance of an S.F. Barnes. Just before the First World War came Warwickshire's Frank Foster, who swerved the ball like Hurst and joined with Barnes in winning a test series in Australia. Between the wars, Burley Morris Tate had no peer as a medium pacer. Bowling what the moderns would call perfect line and length, he generated pace off the pitch, and he could bowl heroically all through the most wearing day. A friendly and popular player for Sussex, he took 155 wickets for England, 38 of them in the 24-5 series in Australia. After the Second War, Tate had a successor of equal powers, Surrey strongman Alec Bedser, who carried England's bowling through half a dozen seasons almost single-handed. Lion-hearted like Tate, Bedser broke his record by taking 39 wickets in the 53 Ashes series, and he went on to take a then record 236 in 52 tests.
In Australia, he bowled so many overs out there that when the ball got old after about 5 overs in Australia in those days, all the shine used to sort of peel off and it used to be a bit of a rag. So he used to come up, and because he was so accurate, having bowled such a lot, he started to learn how to leg cut the ball. So when he got hold of the new ball, it was swinging in like that and cutting like that sometimes, and by God, you had to be on your toes to keep wicket. It was really a treat.
Australia produced jovial Bill Johnston, a marvellous backup bowler. While Pakistan had Fazl Mahmood, a magician on matting pitches, he engineered his country's first victories over England and Australia. Yorkshireman Bob Appleyard, though haunted by ill health, had some great moments during a brief career, taking 200 cheap wickets with cutters and swingers in 1951, his first full season.
It's hard to categorise Gary Sobers. This great West Indian cricketer, glorious batsman, electric fieldsman and triple-style bowler could deliver orthodox left-arm spin, wrist spin and fast-medium swing. And with a new ball, he could be every bit as testing as his more renowned out-and-out fast-bowling teammates. From New Zealand came Dick Motts, the first to take 100 Test wickets for his country. But the great sensation as the 1970s unfolded was Bob Massey from Western Australia, who took 16 wickets, 8 in each innings, on his Test debut, at Lord's of all places. He made the ball veer around as if it was radio-controlled, and some good England batsmen hadn't a clue against him as he operated mainly from around the wicket, bowling sharp in-duckers. Oddly, he was soon to fade away, a one-Test wonder, but he'd made an entire Test match his own.
5 years after Massey, England baptised a confident young man from Somerset named Ian Botham. He may not care to be listed among the fast-medium bowlers, but in all truth, apart from 1 or 2 seasons when his pace has been brisk enough to hurry the most nimble of batsmen, the bulk of his massive bag of Test wickets has come from a quite dazzling array of deliveries, including an in-swinger and an out-swinger bowled with an almost identical action. Clever slower balls, boot-crushing Yorkers, off-cutters, and it must be admitted, even pathetic long hops. These have all brought wickets to this headline-making cricketer, who eventually topped the world's list of Test successes, beating Lilly and then running neck and neck with Hadley. Into his 30s, Botham cut down his pace and reduced the variations. His striking rate slowed down, but with his dynamic batting and daredevil close catching, he remained a giant among all-rounders.
Richard Hadley, another to warrant inclusion in the fast bowling section in the earlier part of his career, cut down his run-up and his speed and developed into the shrewdest of fast-medium bowlers. Few could have foreseen that the young New Zealander of the early 1970s would head the Test table 15 years on, a dizzy position earned by skill and intelligence of the first order. Hadley thinks batsmen into their downfall and keeps relentlessly in the channel on off-stump, a true professional. Another medium-pace menace, one who refused to give in to a serious shoulder injury, was Australia's Terry Alderman. He achieved a stunning performance of 42 wickets in the 1981 series in England while on the losing side. Not express bowlers, any of them, but subtle as the best spin bowlers, gluttons for work, and so often match winners.
And finally, to the explosive category of fast bowling, to the men whose mission in life is to blast out the batsman with sheer speed, inflicting fear before the planned execution, propelling the ball with such velocity that a batsman's reaction could be no more than instinctive. The assassins, the physical men of cricket, the fast men. John Jackson of Notts, known as Foghorn, was the most feared bowler of the 1850s, and he wasn't averse to hurling down a full toss at the batsman's face. Then came George Freeman, an auctioneer from Yorkshire, whom W.G. Grace regarded as the best fast bowler he ever faced. "When the ball hit you," the champion wrote, "you felt as though you'd been cut with a knife." Cricket's biggest shock yet, however, came with the arrival in England of Australia's demon bowler Fred Spofforth. In 1878, he bowled out MCC at Lord's with figures of 11 for 22 in the match, and a few months later at Melbourne, he took the first Test hat-trick. Most famously, though, he took 14 for 90 at the Oval in 1882, when Australia beat the full strength of England for the first time, and the Ashes were created. Spofforth used to storm up to the wickets, all arms and legs and nose, and batsmen fell not only to his ferocity, but to his reputation as well. Later, like many a star bowler to come, he reduced his pace and brought clever variations into his bowling. One who couldn't be bothered with variations was Charles Courtright of Essex. He believed in one thing only, rocketing that ball at the despicable batsman as fast as it would go. No frills. For many years afterwards, he was considered by contemporaries as the fastest bowler of all time. Courtright's path into the England Test 11 was blocked by a magnificent pair of Surrey bowlers, Tom Richardson and Bill Lockwood, Both were very fast, with Lockwood rather more cunning and temperamental. He had a wonderful slower ball. The swarthy Richardson was the darling of the Oval. Honest Tom was brave and strong. He could bowl all day at top pace on those heartless pitches, whipping the ball back from the off. In 4 English seasons from 1894, he took a mountainous total of 1,005 wickets, and there was only 1 new ball permitted per innings in those days.
For speed over a sustained period, another tough and tireless character towered out of this period, Australia's Ernie Jones. When he bounced a fiery delivery through W.G. Grace's beard, the great Englishman was highly displeased. "Sorry, Doc," growled Jones. "She slipped." The next in Australia's line of truly fast bowlers was Tibby Cotter, who was to die in the First World War. He loved to smash stumps and was not averse to chipping a batsman's ribs. Off a long run-up, he bowled with a slinging action and once made an indentation in a batsman's back into which the ball fitted. South Africa's first express bowler was James Coetzer, whose speed was placed second only to Courtride's. From a long run-up, he leapt menacingly, and he had stamina. When he was impatient with drop slips catches, his teammates said he would have been more understanding if he'd had to stand at slip to his own bowling. After the Great War of 1914-18, Australia launched at England the first pair of terror bowlers, Ted MacDonald and Jack Gregory. MacDonald, a Tasmanian, was a classical bowler whose approach to the crease was almost silent. His speed was exceptional, and there was no doubting his aggressive intent. He later played for Lancashire. Gregory, a powerful batsman and superb slip fielder as well, pounded in with undisguised murderous intent. From his kangaroo leap came fast, bouncy deliveries that tested the nerves of the bravest batsmen. The pattern had been set. Hostility at both ends won test matches. Australia won the first 8 straight against England after that war.
Before long, England had real firepower of their own. Harold Larwood, who became the outstanding fast bowler in world cricket between the 2 wars. His run-up and bowling action were perfect, and as with all great fast men, his very name instilled fear into batsmen's hearts. In 1932, he joined with Nottingham teammate Bill Vose in the most renowned twin force ever. This particular form of attack was soon known as bodyline, and it came close to splitting Anglo-Australian relations asunder. Bowling at top speed, short and straight at the batsman, with a cluster of close fielders on the leg side, Larwood and Vose swept England to victory at Sydney twice, Adelaide and Brisbane, and the average of Don Bradman, the prime target, was successfully reduced to human proportions, a mere 56. They had started something. Amidst the bitterness, the feeling grew that such methods had to be outlawed. But although the gross intimidation was legislated against, fast bowlers ever since have caused batsmen concern. Captains and umpires unusually loath to intervene. A country suffering one year finds itself seeking retribution when it has the firepower itself next time combat is resumed. Within months, English spectators and administrators saw what bodyline was all about. The West Indians, Constantine and Martindale, bowled it in the Manchester Test. England's captain Jardine handled it well, but when Wally Hammond's chin was split by a bouncer, he said he had no wish to stay in the game if this was what it was turning into. England's Australian-born fast bowler Gubby Allen refused to bowl the so-called leg theory, but the big Yorkshireman Bill Bowes had no compunction. As war loomed, England's best fast bowlers were Alf Gover and Ken Farnes. Like any red-blooded quickie, Farnes liked to hurl down his ration of short stuff. Like Verity, he was destined not to survive the war.
Like an echo from 1920, Australia, in the shapes of Linwell and Miller, again shocked England in the post-war period from 1946, with hot pace at both ends. Hutton and Compton, England's greatest batsmen of the period, feared Miller more when he was in his meanest mood, but Ray Linwell was the classical fast bowler, smooth, clever, with a lethal bouncer which he usually employed tactically, without excess. A one-time Australian record holder with 228 test wickets, he was a modest, likeable chap off the field, but a figure of terror on it.
Playing with Keith Miller was an experience, and bowling with him, especially together, when we bowled together, he was a great help. to me, and I hope I was a great help to him. If the other side were getting on top and one of us was flagging a bit in our inspiration to bowl fast, Keith would say a few words to me to get my mind back on the game and say a few words against the batsman to make me get worked up, and he would help in that way. And I didn't say that to him because he didn't need it.
Keith Miller was cavalier and unpredictable. Had he not made so many runs, his bowling, mostly very hostile but sometimes a crazy mixture, would have been even more productive. He loved to bowl bouncers, more so when the crowd was voicing its protest as at Trent Bridge, home of Larwood and Vose, the Nottingham Martyrs. Other pairs of fast bowlers might have caused batsmen nightmares, but none can have been more lurid and intense than those conjured up by those sporty Aussie terrors Lindwall and Miller.
When you were batting against Keith Miller, was not to upset him. So when I used to go into bat and Keith was bowling, he didn't mind you hit him for ones and twos, but he disliked intensely for you to hit him for four. And this is what I once did at Sydney, and the next ball, it almost knocked my head off. And I'm lucky to be here to be able to tell the tale. I like to play against him. I think he was one of the most extraordinary cricketers of my time. I was always sorry he wasn't a Yorkshireman.
Well, Yorkshire did eventually produce a post-war fast bowler for England. In '52, along came Fred Truman, never short of a word or a Yorker or bouncer. The first bowler to reach 300 Test wickets, the most colourful cricketer in the world for some years.
Did you ever really think you were going to do this 300 business?
No, not really, and I was getting a bit worried even when I was in this match, nothing seemed to be happening, and all of a sudden it came with a rush, It took me by surprise.
Do you think anyone else will ever do it?
I don't know. There's one thing, if they do, they'll be tired when they're finished.
His action was theoretically perfect, as was his outswinger. His stamina was prodigious, his patriotism manifest, his self-confidence of spectacular proportion. He helped England regain cricket pride after the war, and he made kids in the mining villages as well as the home counties want to bowl fast, faster, fastest.
Freddie was a tremendous bowler, and he was able to swing the ball as well as bowl a few bouncers, and he got more wickets, I suppose, by the surprise element of his deliveries, because you never know what he was going to do. He'd bowl you a full toss at the head, he'd bowl you a bouncer, and then he'd bowl you the magnificent delivery which you weren't prepared for, and of course that's where he got his wickets. With Brian, you could rely on him as to being the straightest bowler I've ever seen.
So often, toiling into the breeze at the other end was Brian Statham of Lancashire, a cricketer's cricketer, low on glamour, high in terms of skill and courage. Extraordinarily loose-limbed, Statham was probably the best of the expanding crop of English fast bowlers in the 50s. He took 250 Test wickets and gained a CBE. The meteoric bowler of them all was Frank Tyson, Northamptonshire's Lancastrian, who in the middle 50s bowled at such a pace that claims were made on his behalf, even by old-timers, that he must be the fastest in history.
Perth, which is the fastest wicket in Australia, I was taking the ball on the up, going like this, just an ordinary ball. In fact, one of them, when he bowled it a bit short, I went up there and I was about 3 foot short, and it nearly went for 6 byes, let alone 4. He was fantastic.
Certainly the Australians of 1954-5 had cause to respect and fear him. Cutting down a marathon run-up, Typhoon Tyson still produced velocity off 20 paces, which seemed quite invisible to the naked eye from side on.
And Frank was bowling 100 miles an hour, and they were shooting along the ground, and if they hit the cracks, it would go past your ear. And I think he finished with 7 for 28. So a marvellous series for Frank. I think it was probably his best series he's ever had in his life. And he was certainly a match-winning factor as far as that series was concerned for England.
Tyson won that Ashes series, but did little after that. History might argue he didn't need to.
By the late 1950s, Australia had rebuilt its fast bowling arsenal, though there were doubts about the legitimacy of some of the weapons. Alan Davison was as pure as a driven snow and became a bulwark of the Australian 11. His command of swing and cut and accuracy was first class, and catches off the edge of his opponent's bats became commonplace. But it was not only the occasional off-breaks of Jim Burke which caused onlookers to murmur about throwing. Ian Meckiff, a popular Victorian, turned a test match or two before being called for throwing in the Brisbane Test of 1963. And the giant Gordon Rorke's arm action was not the only cause for suspicion. His drag in the days of the back foot no ball gave batsmen the impression he was bowling at them from 18 yards. Jeff Griffin of South Africa was no ball for throwing, and Gary Bartlett, perhaps New Zealand's fastest bowler ever, had an action that raised eyebrows and hackles as well.
There were no doubts, however, about the legitimacy of the bowling of the South Africans, Adcock and Heine, though they conceded nothing to any bowlers who ever lived in terms of aggression. They brought success to their country in the 50s and inspired the next generation of fast men who, had they known it at the time, would see South Africa into politically inspired oblivion. Graham Mackenzie, the young Australian, had the ideal physique for a fast bowler, though he was the gentlest of souls out of flannels. He took 246 test wickets, regretfully broke a few batsmen's hands, and was a powerful asset to several skippers over 10 years. After years of making do without, West Indies found a pair of fast bowlers to compare with Constantine and Martindale.
Hall and Griffiths in that year 63. They were as good a pair of fast bowlers hunting together as anyone. I mean, the sight of seeing West coming up from about 40 yards was absolutely fantastic, providing you weren't in front of him. And his gold medallion that he had swinging around his neck and his hands would be punching away, you know. On the other hand, Charlie Griffiths, he was a different type of bowler. He had a very big change in pace. When he was bowling sort of ordinary pace, you could almost put one hand in your pocket and play him quite readily with your top hand. But then without any notice at all, any prior notice in his action, all of a sudden one would come at you 4 yards quicker. A lot of the players who played against him thought he was a bit dubious in his action. Whenever Frankie Waddle was in danger of something happening and the game running away from him, he used to sort of haul Charlie up and Wes, and one of them would break through somehow or another.
South Africa had Peter Pollock, a scowling, mean, probing fast bowler, and Mike Proctor, for a time perhaps the world's finest cricketer. His bowling action was unorthodox but frighteningly effective, with extreme pace, steep bounce and a terrifying late swing from outside off stump. New Zealand had lumbering left-arm Richard Collinge, who could be decidedly sharp, and he took over 100 test wickets. A true test match winner, though, was the wiry John Snow of Sussex and England. A poet, a loner, and capable of temperamental bursts with or without the ball, he became England's #1 fast bowler in the late 1960s and helped win the Ashes in Australia in 70-71. With his loping, rhythmic approach and whippy arm action, he was no tearaway or broad-chested bully, and yet opponents feared him just as much. Son of a vicar, Snow was so often seen as having been sent by the devil himself. Peter Lever was one of his better supporting bowlers, but one rogue bouncer to New Zealand #11, Ewan Chatfield, in 1975 came close to leaving the Lancastrian with a fatality on his hands. Pakistan's Sarfraz Nawaz was an awkward, ill-tempered fast bowler of deceptive pace, with a twinkle in his eye and an oath on his tongue. He was never quite in the class of Imran Khan, who between 1971 and 1987 took over 300 test wickets and lifted Pakistan to many successes with new ball bowling of the highest quality.
Another desperately destructive partnership was formed in 1974, causing havoc to the visiting English team and later a variety of other opposition. Australia's Dennis Lillee was a raking tearaway bowler, hell-bent on flinging every ball down at tremendous speed. Soon he learned that shrewd husbandry of his physical resources allowed him to bowl for longer and set batsmen even more problems. He became one of the greatest bowlers ever. His equally macho mate was Jeff Thomson, whose slinging action deprived batsmen of any sight of the ball until the very last split second. His strength of shoulder generated frightening lift from a foolish length, and his scientifically measured speed in 1978, 99.8 miles an hour, became a world record. Lilly and Tomo, the pair who gave Ian Chappell's new generation Australian 11 a cutting edge of terror.
It was Bob Willis's bad luck not to have a regular fellow assassin, though Botham bowled opposite him in many tests. For years, the gangling, unsmiling giant was England's only truly hostile bowler. He had to battle against constant knee problems which needed operations. But time and again, he applied his own scalpel to the enemy batting lineup, never more memorably than in 1981. After Botham's sensational innings, he tore in like a man possessed and ripped Australia apart to give his beloved England an unlikely 18-run victory at Headingley. Later, a captain of England, a rare honour for a fast bowler, Willis piled up over 300 test wickets before creaking heroically into retirement. Other good fast bowlers appeared on the international scene in the late 70s. Geoff Lawson and Rodney Hogg of Australia, both sharp in pace and mean of line. Hogg actually took 41 England wickets in the 6 tests of 1978-9 when the top names were away playing Packer cricket. India at last found the fast bowler of her dreams, the noble Kapil Dev, who lived up to all expectations and went further, taking over 300 test wickets in the hectic programme of modern international cricket.
But just when the cricket world thought it had seen the ultimate in aggressive and even intimidatory bowling, West Indies captain Clive Lloyd conceived of something totally relentless, of maximum probing power, a 4-prong pace attack, blistering in speed, none of the bowlers ever getting too tired, pace, pace, and more pace. It became a numbing spectacle and batsmen crumpled physically and mentally under the non-stop pressure. But it won many, many test matches and all West Indians stood stubbornly behind the principle. There was Michael Holding of Jamaica, a prince among express bowlers. At his sheer pace, he probably scarcely needed the bouncer, but he employed it freely. His was the perfect action, with a deceptively soft and easy approach reminiscent of MacDonald, the Australian. There was Andy Roberts, master of the throat ball, a cold-eyed, bustling, silent operator from Antigua. There was the clumsy giant Colin Croft from Guyana, who came at you seemingly from mid-off, sometimes dangerously from around the wicket, the ball looming from behind his head. And there was Joel Garner, the 6-foot 8-inch Barbadian who speared in an often unplayable Yorker or made the ball spring horribly up off a length. These four took over 800 test wickets between them and inflicted bruises and splintered bones beyond calculation.
England continued to search for another Truman or Snow or Willis, Graham Dilley showing glimpses of promise but suffering injury setbacks. And Neil Foster developing well along the lines of the hard, toiling, nagging English professional. Australia's resurgence was partly based on the lanky Bruce Reid, who brings the ball down from a great height. And fiery Craig McDermott, who carried his side through his first tour of England when aged only 20. At Old Trafford, he took 8 for 141 off 36 overs, pounding in like some latter-day Tom Richardson, and giving Australians cause to hope that the huge gap caused by the retirement of Dennis Lillee was on the way to being filled.
Merv Hughes, another of Australia's new generation of penetrative fast bowlers, took a furious hat-trick against West Indies. His mock malevolence sometimes obscures his skill, but his entertainment value is never in question. At the same time, Pakistan was rejoicing in its most gifted young cricketer in years, Wasim Akram, who is capable of lethal spells with his quick arm action and ability to move the ball either way at speed. And England's recovery from the dark days of the late 1980s owed much to Angus Fraser of Middlesex, who comes down from a fair height with unusually reliable control of length and direction. More explosive is Derbyshire's Jamaican-born Devon Malcolm. Muscular, undemonstrative, full of stamina, this fast man has given England's bowling a long-awaited spearhead.
But while spin bowling continued to make a comeback, to the relief of the connoisseurs, the mass pace attack as fielded by West Indies continued to be the most decisive force in world bowling. Roberts, Garner, Croft, Holding, they'd all gone, but Malcolm Marshall remained the most destructive bowler in the game. Patrick Patterson was such a threat on West Indian pitches, an eminent English writer said he fully expected a batsman to be killed at any moment. There was, besides, Courtney Walsh, Holding's spidery Jamaican successor. And Winston Davis, another product of the smaller islands, at times quite as dangerous as Marshall.
I think the single biggest factor is the fact there's no real respite. Once you've, say, seen off Marshall and Ambrose, then you get Walsh and Patterson or Benjamin or someone else coming on. And it's the same sort of attack, the same pace theory, which gives you no real rest, no real time to consolidate or to relax at all. Although you've batted for an hour, say, you might not have got more than 20 runs or so on the board, or even less probably, unless you've been playing very well. And it's actually the question of adapting to a day seeming to be twice as long as normal.
In 1988 came the extremely tall and accurate Kirtley Ambrose, filling Garner's boots very capably. And of course there's Ian Bishop. It seems the Caribbean will always be a breeding ground for fast bowlers, the excitement of the more violent form of attack having special appeal to these joyful athletic people, even if the excessive pace has, for the time being, stunted growth of their own up-and-coming batsmen. We've shown you some of the finest bowlers, but of course some very good ones have had to be omitted. But of those you've seen, who would you rate as having the greatest power to deceive or to defeat by sheer force? Would it have been Spofforth, or Turner, or Barnes, Larwood, or O'Reilly, Laker, Limwell, Lillee, one of the magic men, Wright, Chandrasekhar, Abdul Qadir? Would it have been Holding, Tyson, Hadley? Not easy. In fact, it's impossible, but I'll have a go. My number one is Sydney Barnes. My number two, by a whisker from Lillee, Ray Limwell. And number three, Abdul Qadir. I wonder how David rates it.
My choice? SF Barnes. Or maybe Bill O'Reilly. Or it could be Ray Limwell. Or Abdul Qadir, Malcolm Marshall, Richard Hadley. I think we'd better wind the tape back to the beginning and start again. Play.